Trustee Anselmo.
Here.
Trustee Berger.
Here.
Trustee Zalek.
Here.
Trustee Bruzaloni.
Here.
Trustee McCarthy. Mayor Severino.
Here. We are here for a special workshop meeting, Monday, March 3rd, 2025, immediately following the board meeting. We are now in session for our agenda, and I will call on John Batak, as usual. Are you going to start this, John?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening to the village board members and those joining us from home this evening. So, we are here to talk about the village's water and sanitary sewer fund. If I had to try and summarize the activities of this fund as simply as possible, the village purchases and delivers clean drinking water to all businesses and residents within the community. And secondly, we collect and treat sanitary sewage at the wastewater reclamation center. So that's the simple part. It gets a little bit more complicated from there. And it's probably not an understatement that these are among the most basic services, yet critical services that we are responsible for providing to the community, basically on a continuing basis. They never stop. So they're very important systems to everybody in the town. So I'm going to begin this evening by walking through a couple of key metrics that provide a little bit of insight into the financial workings of the fund. We'll then move to a fairly high-level discussion or overview of the fund for the immediate coming fiscal year, fiscal 26, which begins on May 1st of this year. This really provides a near-term focus on the fund. And as we kind of go through the presentation, that only gives you kind of a snapshot. So there's much more to tell within the workings of the Water and Sewer Fund than just a single year. So from there, we'll transition to a much longer-term view of the fund and cover our 10-year capital improvement program. And lastly, we'll kind of wrap with some more very interesting financial data. We'll talk about the fund's reserves. We'll talk about cash flows. We'll talk about a rate recommendation for this coming May 1st. Just kind of moving into a little bit of background and foundational information. For this coming fiscal year, we're projecting the Water and Sewer Fund will generate approximately $16 million to support both the ongoing day-to-day operations as well as providing funding for capital improvements within the system. And I have on this slide all of those, virtually all of that money comes from users of the system through 11,000 water bills that we mail out every single month. So about 93% of all fund reserves actually come from direct charges, metered water revenue, and of course the sewer charges are based on water used by each household or business. Just the other 7% is primarily interest that's earned on fund reserves. And we also, and then it's actually fairly sizable in this environment because we're still earning a pretty good return on our reserve balances. And then the second, we call them non-operating revenues, comes from leases that we have actively on some of the water apparatus, some of the water towers throughout town. That generates about $200,000 a year in revenues to the fund. So as I said, most of everything comes from all of the residents and businesses that are billed on a monthly basis. The first chart shows billed water consumption for the last 10 years. And this is probably the most uninspiring graph you may ever see because it's basically dead flat. We are selling about the same amount of water every year for the past 10 years. In fact, we're almost billing exactly in fiscal 25 what we billed back in 2016. So we have little ups and little downs, but by and large, there's not a great expectation for growth in in total billed revenues. We're essentially a built-out community. We're not growing leaps and bounds. We see businesses come, we see businesses go. So this is what we have to work with. Said another way, this basically shows us our capacity for generating revenue. So it's based on the same amount of gallonage that we bill each year. So obviously, if we're not selling more water and our costs are going up, and I will tell you, our cost trend is not flat like this. It usually starts with the DuPage Water Commission and the city of Chicago as they raise rates every single year. So if we're not billing more water, rates have to go up just to buy the same water and sell the same amount of water each year. So that's basically, in probably a circular direction, the gist of what we're working with in terms of our fund and its funding. This next graphic is a measure of our water system efficiency. It measures the percentage of water that we purchase annually from the DuPage Water Commission that is ultimately billed to end customers. So every gallon we purchase about 1.25 billion gallons of water each year from the Water Commission. No system, as you all know on the board, no water system sells every single gallon that they purchase. Typical areas of loss can include things like water main breaks. These are the 3 a.m. in the 10-degree weather pipes that burst, and public works crews go out and patch that. So all of that water becomes unmetered. It's water that we've already purchased. We have system leaks that happen underground. And as we've said year over year, we have a regular leak detection program that we run, and we try to keep the system as tight as we can. Our hydrant flushing program, most folks are very familiar with what goes on with hydrant flushing. There are lots of absolutely great reasons why we flush hydrants every single year, and Brad can probably teach a master class in that. I won't get into the details with that, but that's also water that's not ultimately billed to end customers. And lastly, water meters, the actual water meters that record consumption, they actually do slow down as they age. And we do have a lot of older water meters within our system. So that also contributes to unaccounted for loss that is ultimately not billed out. If we look at the fiscal 25, our current fiscal year is kind of the shaded one on the right-hand side. We're looking to bill just shy of 95% of every 100 gallons that we purchase from the Water Commission. And industry standard is if you have a system that's 90% or better that you're billing of what you purchase, you're doing pretty well. It's considered a pretty tight system. So since 2020, we've been in the mid-90s, which is actually excellent performance. But to just provide an illustration why this is such an important metric, if we look at that 5.1% that we didn't bill, we paid the Water Commission $320,000 for that water that is ultimately never billed. And if we applied the Carroll Stream rates to that, that unbilled water represents $803,000 in missed billing opportunity. So in fact, it is very important that we take very close attention to this ratio, and we need action when we see dips in that, because that is waste within the system. And with flat water sales, we can't really afford to be very wasteful. I'll beat the dead horse, but I do have one other possible takeaway from this 94.9% example. And I'm going to do a little bit of a flash forward, so forgive me. I know the board has read the entire presentation already, but Director Fink has already provided a slide later on in the deck that makes an estimate based on the age of our meters in our system, estimating approximately 17.5 million gallons of water loss just because the water meter is not recording the actual consumption, it's recording less. If we were to tighten up that system with basically all new water meters that measured 100% of the gallonage that went through them, we can add 1.6 to that 4.5. So we would be billing 96.5%. So that'd be a phenomenal ratio, but that's just one potential pocket for loss that we hope to address in our longer-term discussion this evening. Okay, moving on to the fiscal 26 budget, and of course, shout-out questions, because I don't want to steamroll through the presentation, but we do have a lot to cover. Just an overview graph of the total expense budget within fiscal 26. Obviously, it's always been this way. The cost of raw water is the system's number one largest cost, and it has been historically. This blue 44% of the total budget represents that 1.125 billion gallons that we purchase from the Water Commission each year. We have a contract operation at the Wastewater Reclamation Center. That's about 16% of the total budget. And then staff, village staff, including both public works representatives as well as billing staff in the finance department, make up about 15% of the total. The one thing that makes this graph change year over year is this capital piece. So next year, I'd call it more of a modest capital investment. But we're coming up within the next 3 years on a balloon, a capital investment at the wastewater treatment plant. So we'll see the size of these pieces change slightly over time. So it doesn't look the same every year, but typically the Water Commission is the largest single cost within the water fund. Okay, I'm going to just, here's a summary of some major operating cost areas. So this is the day-to-day operations of the fund for fiscal 26. In total, operating costs for the fund are projected to increase in fiscal 26 by 7.6% over our current year fiscal 25 budget. And I'll give you a few details on each of these categories. The first one being salaries and wages. We're looking at a cost increase, a budgetary cost increase of about 9.9% compared to our current year budget. This is first of all due to normal salary and benefit adjustments. And on the benefit side, I will tell you, and we may have covered this in the general fund, but we're not having a good year with our health plan. That alone is going to be a 10% increase just for health coverage benefits. And I mentioned, and Manager Homer, I think, mentioned in one of our previous meetings, we're proposing the recruitment of an additional utility billing clerk within this budget, mainly to address transition and retirement on our initial time frame within this next 12 months, but also depending on where we wind up with investment in a meter change-out program, that third position is probably going to be essential. The water purchases through the commission is going to be raising rates about 3.9%. That boils down to 22 cents for May 1st. So their current rate of $5.58 per 1,000 gallons will go up to $5.80. So they are based on the city of Chicago CPI factor for calendar 2024. That was 4%. So they're just one point behind that 4% increase for the Water Commission. The contract with the Wastewater Reclamation Center is projected to go up 4.4% over the current year. Our contractual services category is a soup to nuts category. It contains a lot of contract types of services. We're looking at 16.9% there. Two of the largest increases there are an electrical SCADA cabinet at the Fair Oaks lift station. And if there are specific questions on that, I'll certainly push those over to Brad. He'd be able to address those in more detail. We also have an increase in our large meter testing program of $18,500. That's not necessarily per se. I believe we do those, Brad, on sort of a zone basis or on a frequency basis. So this just happens to be a larger year, and it ebbs and flows similar to like the tree trimming program based on zone size. We just have a little bit of additional cost on meter testing next year. The commodities category is looking to be up almost 30%, and the reason for this is it does represent a partial year of a proposed water meter replacement program, which again, Brad will be covering as we hit the capital investment piece of the presentation. So again, I've pretty much made a comment on all of the categories that are on this very hard to read chart on the overhead. Do board members have the presentation? They're looking at it in there at the dais. Maybe a couple more thoughts on the overall position of the fund, and I'd like to make 2 points here. If we look at our fiscal 25 budget, the revised budget, that's actually the adopted budget, the far left column, and look at the estimated fiscal 25 performance. If you look at the very bottom of the sheet, it says fund income loss. We projected just under $1.8 million surplus in the water fund for fiscal 25 on a budgetary basis. We think we're going to come in almost $1 million better this year, which is certainly good news. That's $2.7 million surplus in the total fund for this current fiscal year, where we've got 2 months to go. The positive variance there is caused by interest income that was much greater than we anticipated, so almost all on the revenue side. And also the Villas of Fair Oaks project generated about $250,000 in permit fees, which were not originally in the budget. So certainly that's all good news. So the 2 points I wanted to make on this, and again, it requires a little bit of fast forward to later in the presentation. So one can look at this chart and say, what's the problem? We have a $2.7 million surplus. Fast forwarding in the presentation and using even spending, we're proposing a 10-year, $37 million capital improvement program. So divided by 10 years using simple math. And the other comment is the capital component in this budget is almost nothing. So it makes it kind of an interesting comparison. There's very, very little capital in this current year. So without any capital, we're banking 2.7. That should probably be around 3.7, considering the proposed projects that we're going to get into in a moment. The second point I wanted to make on this is you cannot just look at this from the short term. We have to look at the fund on a long-term, long-range basis so that we make sure everything that's needed in terms of plant, equipment, all of the capital items we're able to do in a systematic and methodical schedule. So, sorry for running on that. So this is kind of the main event when we're going to talk about the 10-year capital improvement program. So I'll make a couple comments, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Brad, who will take us through some of the detail of projects that are planned in the next decade. So over the last 12 months, staff has taken a deeper dive on some of the longer-term issues facing the Water and Sewer Fund, most notably the water main replacements and the water meter replacement program. So we've updated this 10-year plan to include outlays that are necessary to make sure that the fund is able to sustain itself into the future. And we realized, so that this whole process, quite honestly, for staff has probably been, we've done the most meetings, the most multi-departmental meetings, a little bit of indigestion as we're trying to find out what the best method of lining up these projects is, given the structure of the water fund. So we believe we've come up with a plan that will help address all of the major critical elements of the plan that we can make sure everything's addressed on this 10-year time horizon. Just another side note, this last bullet here, we're proposing that the general fund surplus that's anticipated around $4.2 million for April 30th be transferred to the Water and Sewer Fund. We have a very large capital investment piece over this next 3 years. It totals $14.5 million. $13.1 million of that is all at the Wastewater Reclamation Center. And so that includes the Headworks project and some outward projects. Without this investment, and remember 2 years ago, we also put $5.3 million of ARPA money into this fund because we knew it was going to be very capital intensive. So the fact that our cash reserves already have that $5.3 million in it, and we're proposing to put another $4.2 million in, that's about $9.5 million that hasn't been contributed by ratepayers. But what it also tells me is our rates as they currently exist that are charged to residents really don't sufficiently cover all of those capital costs. So we've got a break, we've got the capital, we're not going to see ARPA money anymore, but we can all agree on that. We're not going to see that type of infusion of capital, government stimulus. Those days, I think, are behind us at this point. So the fund has got the money to do these near-term, very intensive capital improvements, but some of the other projects, like the sewer lining projects that are proposed and the regular investment in our water main replacements, those are slotted to begin in the second 5 years of the 10-year plan, because we really have to have reserves recover so that we have enough money to start those programs on an ongoing basis. So I apologize for a lot of words there. Again, we've discussed this at length at the staff level, but we feel with these changes we're on really good footing as long as we're able to keep moderate increases in rates on a going forward basis. I apologize, I didn't advance the slide, so I talked about all that stuff, and that's the slide that kind of covers what my comments were. I have one more, and it's my hope I really didn't confuse anybody with this jumbly mess of a slide. You know, last year was the first year we pulled out the AARP card because Carol Stream became 65 years of age last year. So I basically updated this same slide that was in our deck last year. So the main takeaway from this is last year we talked about a lot of these capital initiatives that were not funded. We have now incorporated those into the 10-year plan because honestly, we really need to see those in the plan so that we can make better informed decisions about rates. The only caveats that aren't necessarily covered in these updates, I've noted the sewer televising program. We've had discussion on that over the past year and a half with staff. We're not quite settled in on what our direction is there. So that is one element that's not included in the 10-year plan. And as the mayor alluded to earlier, the DuPage Water Commission alternate source water project, meaning if we're going to go on, if the Water Commission is going to go buy their water from somebody other than Chicago, none of this plan contemplates any of those types of changes. And as the mayor said, that's billions and billions of dollars among all members of the Water Commission. So that is not included as part of this. With that, unless there are any questions right now, I'm going to pass it over to Brad, who's going to kind of tee up some of the major initiatives for this 10-year plan.
Thank you. So what we did is we kind of looked at the short-term projects, 1 to 3 years, and then more of the longer-term projects, so up to 10 years. The first major project that I'll cover is in the WRC, or the Water Reclamation Center. That is our Headworks. This has been in the pipeline for quite some time. This was based on a 2022 facility assessment that was performed. This was a recommendation that was provided. Last year, we commissioned Baxter & Woodman to kind of take a little deeper dive into this. This Headworks is approximately 32 years old, so what that assessment did was take a look at maybe there were more efficient or different ways of achieving what is needed within the Headworks with different technologies. What this Headworks basically does, it's the head of the treatment plant. All the wastewater sewage comes to this one location, and this filters out all the larger material, the non-organic material that the plant can't process. So this is a pretty critical component. Based on that assessment, Baxter Woodman found out that our screw pumps are in dire shape. Now, we did have this project to address these, kind of programmed out, I think, in FY '29. Unfortunately, based on the current condition, we feel that those need to be moved up. If we do those as part of this project, maybe we can take advantage of some economies of scale. Basically, the screw pumps, again, are a critical component because the main interceptor from all the sewage comes to these locations. These screws lift the sewage 27 feet in the air so it can hydraulically go and be treated throughout the plant. So pretty critical component here. So, you know, this is a 3-year project, year design, probably 2-year construction project at about $10.25 million. The next slide is more of a longer-term outlook. This is the 10-year outlook for the wastewater treatment plant. Identified also in the 2022 study were some of these items. The sand filter replacement, we're projecting in 27 through 29. Basically, this is sand filter are at the tail end of the plant, and what this does is the final effluent kind of filters through 12 inches of sand prior to it being disinfected just before it's released into Klein Creek. So again, pretty critical component. These were originally constructed in 1991, and they're due for an upgrade. We're probably going to look at replacing in kind. There are other technologies out there, but they're quite a bit more expensive. But again, we'll kind of take a deeper dive into that as it gets closer. Next one is phosphorus removal improvements. This has been on the horizon for quite some time. The IEPA regulates exactly what we can and cannot discharge into Klein Creek. One of the things that they look at is phosphorus limits. We recently got some encouraging news. Engineering is instrumental in working with the IEPA and the DuPage River Salt Creek Work Group to kind of come up and a regional approach for some of these effluent limits for all these treatment plants. We did hear, like I said, some encouraging news just last week that we have an idea of what those limits are going to be. So now we can at least start to plan, and we have a better understanding of what we're going to be held to. So again, initially we thought we had a placeholder in there for $3.7 million. We'll see how that shakes out as we plan, work with the engineers to be able to meet our limit requirement in FY38. So again, that's going to take a lot of, there's a number of different ways to achieve the phosphorus limit. That's either, through chemical or actual physical plant processes. So we'll see what turns out to be the best approach.
Not to, because I know this is a much, much larger conversation, but now that we know what the limits are going to be, are they more favorable than what we had thought that they were going to be? Meaning, are they less restrictive?
So it's not official. However, it's what was proposed. So they didn't come back with a more restrictive limit. So what the DRCW group proposed to the IEPA, it seems as though they're going to be acceptable to those limits.
Okay, and just so that everyone, we understand this, but just so that our residents understand it, this regulation is an unfunded mandate, meaning we don't get the choice. We have to abide by it. We have to find the money to do it. And the state will not be giving us money to do this because every single town is going to be going through this, or every reclamation center is going to be going through this. This is statewide. So we don't get a choice to say, No, we're not going to participate because we don't have the money.
That is correct. The only thing that they provide is a loan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. Yes, they
Yeah,
will
but-
loan us money, yes,
Exactly.
with an interest rate, yes.
Exactly. Right,
Yes.
right.
One question that actually trustee Guthrie and I have is, what's the current level of phosphorus and why do we need to cut it back? I guess I don't understand what phosphorus in the water, what the big deal is.
So what that does is high levels of phosphorus in the water can create algae blooms, which deprives the aquatic plant life of oxygen. So in theory, the less, you need phosphorus at some level, but just too much could be considered detrimental to the stream. So to put it in perspective, I think our phosphorus limit is 3.2 milligrams per liter. This proposed limit is going to be, what is it, 30.3? 0.28. So it's a considerable decrease. So we just have to figure out how to get there. Luckily, we have some time. It has to be fully implemented by FY '38.
Thank you.
And then finally, for the WRC is anaerobic digester dome replacement. Basically, these anaerobic digesters, originally constructed in 2002, they're basically giant covered concrete tanks. The concrete is in excellent condition still. The dome covers. They're fiberglass. Usually get 20 to 30 years out of them. They're needed to basically contain the odor. They do assist in some of the biological process, but for the most part, it's contain odor. But those have been identified as needing replacement. There's two of those. Any questions on the wastewater portion of the short-term and long-term proposed? Then moving on to water. One thing that we identified as critical in the short term was our residential water meter replacement. If you look at the slide, just for clarification purposes, there are two items up there. The brass-looking piece of equipment is the meter. So that's actually what the water flows through and what is measured. The other piece of equipment is the AMR, or the automated meter reading device. What that does is hooks to the meter, and all that does is transmit the readings so that the drive-by person can obtain the readings to get the finance. Yes, sir.
So in years past, I believe we've been incorporating new AMRs for a number of households. And it's come to my attention that people are blaming those for all of a sudden getting a higher bill. But the AMR has nothing to do with measuring water or anything else. And obviously, if the people get a big jump in their bill, they can call the village and get an explanation on what could it be, or watering lawns or filling a pool. But it just seems like I've had a few people say as soon as the AMR gets installed, all of a sudden
My bill
we
tripled.
get ripped off, our bill tripled. So
Yeah.
I'm just making sure that the AMR has nothing to do with that. It's just the meter. It's a way for the meter reading to be to the village.
That is correct. It has nothing to do with the reading. It just simply transmits what is reading on the meter.
You've heard that too?
Many times.
Interesting.
Like their bill triples and I'm like,
Yeah, if anybody has an issue, I would encourage them to reach out. Public Works, we'd be more than happy to
Okay,
look into it.
perfect.
and-
Of course, the problem is the 80% of water meters we need to replace, when those get replaced, some people's bills will go up because it will then be, it'll be
Possibly.
reading it correctly.
Yeah, that's possible. So, yes, so what we're proposing here is a meter replacement. Basically, a little timeline, give you a little history. Back in 2016, Public Works presented a full meter replacement program. At that time, there was some hesitancy with doing such a massive, widespread program all at once. So what we did is we pulled a number of meters. We tested those. They actually tested fairly well. So at that time, Public Works decided, okay, we'll pull back on the meters, we won't do those at that time, and we'll just swap out and change the AMRs, which the program we just recently completed in 2023. Taking another look at those meters, you know, we have close to 11,000 meters in the village, residential meters. And we have roughly 7,500 that are anywhere from the ages of 20 to 35 years old. Generally speaking, you should look at replacing meters anywhere from 15 to 20 years. So at 20 years is really when you start to see the fall off in accuracy where the meters slow down. So the next slide I have, this was provided by the engineering department. This really has some really great data. What this, in a nutshell, is showing us is meter by age. We have a number of different types of meters, but essentially these are all residential. The different colors are just based on minor fluctuation in size. But you can see that the majority of the village's meters are, you know, between 20 and 35 years old. At 25, industry standard says you could get 95% accuracy. By the time you get to 30, you're at 81% accuracy. So, you know, we feel that it's due, that we need to, the time is now to take a look at a comprehensive, just a residential meter replacement program. What the next slide, any questions on that? Again, that was just kind of a graphical, show you, give an idea of the ages of the meters. I know this was mentioned earlier in the presentation. This is, again, kind of an analysis of kind of the water loss and what that means to the Village Carroll Stream. If you look at the meter age in the graph there, based on the number of meters that we have 20 years old, 25, and 30 years old, you know, we're looking at an annual loss of, you know, 17.5 million gallons. So what that equates to is, you know, $159,000 from the water fund, and unfortunately, we don't have any way of measuring wastewater discharge, so that's, the water use is how we also calculate your sewer bill. So, you know, we're losing accuracy there. It could relate to, you know, roughly $85,000. So total of, you know, approximately $244,000 of annual revenue, potential revenue loss that we are currently experiencing now, just based on the age of our residential meters. So, you know, this is going to be a very daunting task. It's going to require getting into residential homes similar to the AMR program. I'm confident if the village board decides to move forward that we can do this in-house. We've proven we've been able to do it with the AMR program. We're looking at just material costs, you know, probably $1.6+ million. Like I said, over a, you know, 5 to 6 year turnout. What we'd like to do, we're kind of just in the infancy stage. There's so many different components to this. We'd like to take again, a real deep look at this, bring back, can maybe a workshop sometime in August, and kind of lay out exactly the details on what we'd like to do, what we'd like to propose moving forward with the change out.
Brad, can I ask you, so you mentioned we did AMRs a couple of years ago. We completed that on the residential side. Can you talk about the fact, we know AMRs run off of batteries. Can you talk about battery life with the new AMR pieces and give the board some sense of what we're looking at from an AMR perspective as they relate to the meters?
Yeah, so the AMRs, they say they have a 20-year battery life. It's 10-year guaranteed, but then each year after 10 years, it's kind of graduated. So 11 year, it's 90%, so on to 20. And it'd be full replacement, full refund. We started the program in 2018, so, and again, finished it in 2023. We still had a few AMRs prior to that that are older. However, we still have some pretty good life left in our current AMRs that we replace. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at is obviously, salvaging those AMRs. I mean, obviously, that was close to a $4 million investment by the village. We obviously want to get the most life out of those as we possibly can. So that'll be part of our equation when we go into this and look at what's the best, what's compatible with those AMRs, which meter is compatible, what kind of reading is compatible. The whole thing will be, vetted, every option, and then presented to the village board and village manager as a recommendation.
But so we started those in 18, which means some of them are already 7 years old. And this becomes a multi-year project. What's the difference in cost of a new AMR versus having to go back again in 5 or 6 years just to replace the AMR?
Well, that'll be looked at. What we have to do is kind of take a look at the age of the meters and kind of marry that with the age of the AMRs.
Right.
Towards the tail end of the program, if we see that a meter that we're replacing, the AMR is
Basically brand
15,
new.
16 years old anyway.
Right.
At that point, since we're in there once, we may just change. So there's a lot of components that go into making these decisions. So, that'll all be looked at.
I just don't want to all of a sudden, 4 years from now, we're still working on replacing water meters, and all of a sudden we have a conversation about having to go back and replace AMRs that maybe we should have just replaced at the same time we did the meter, so we don't have to look at the labor hours and maybe one off where it's more expensive because you're only buying 20 instead of 1,000. We got to look at is it really worth saying, well, this is only 10 years old, so it should be good. And then all of a sudden figure out that, like I said, in a few more years later, we're dropping another $4 million replacing AMRs.
If I remember correctly, and I could be wrong on this, when we were replacing the AMRs, we went with the oldest ones first. So if we use that same logic, then when we're replacing water meters, we're going to be replacing the oldest water meters, which means
Should be the oldest AMRs.
the oldest AMRs. So,
In theory.
in theory. I mean, but if if the meter program is another 6-year program, that means then we're going to finish water meters and then go into another 6-year AMR program. So like, we could be doing water meter AMR programs every 6 years, alternating based on.
Which is why I'm saying maybe we
Yeah,
put it
no,
together.
I get it, but like, I'm pretty sure my AMR was in 2020 or 2021. So I was like towards the end of it. So I'm guessing that I'm going to be towards the end for my water meter as well, but my water meter's 30 years old. I don't think it's ever been replaced since our houses were built, because we were talking about this. Our houses were built in 1993. So, it's possible that like my water meter could be one of the first ones in this group replaced, but my AMR is only 2 years old, 3 years old, whatever it is, 4 years old. The question I have, though, I know how long, I mean, the AMR was quick. I mean, he was in the house for 8 minutes, maybe, 10 because we chit-chatted for 2 extra minutes. But how long does a water meter take to replace, and how much more effort is a water meter replacement than the AMR? I mean, we basically cleared the stuff around the water meter in the basement. What's the water, or the AMR, what's the water meter going to take?
Yeah, it's not going to take too much effort. It will take more effort, but not a lot. Basically, what you're doing is if you looked at the picture of that, it was back in, keep going back.
Unthreaded.
That, right there.
One
You have two threaded sides.
Right.
Basically, since you already have a meter, you just unbolt both of those, remove it, put the new meter in, tighten it down.
You know, if you just want to drop it off at my house, I'll just do my own. It seems easy enough.
Now, we will have to obviously unhook the AMR, hook that up to the new meter, so, but it's relatively quick, yes.
So
Won't entail-
it's relatively painless to the resident?
Yeah, absolutely. Won't entail additional plumbing or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on this slide? When should a meter be replaced?
You're planning on replacing all the 7,500 plus of the older ones for sure. And then, I mean, where will your cutoff be if it's under 10 years old or?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's going to be part of our overall analysis.
Right.
And our recommendation that comes back to you. Yeah, obviously, the worst first. ones that are
Right,
the
I mean,
oldest.
I'm also thinking that done correctly, if you place an order for 7,500 of them, it's gonna be a lot cheaper per unit than if you buy 100 at a time.
Yeah.
Which is what you guys usually do, so.
Yeah, we will definitely buy them in bulk to see if we get a discount. I don't know that we can get them that 7,500 at a time, but.
You can place the order for them.
Guaranteed, yeah, I mean, you guarantee an order,
Yes, correct.
that might work the same way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, moving on to the water fund. This relates to our water main replacement project. Again, engineering worked with our water division, supplied data, came up with this really nice graph that kind of puts everything into perspective as far as overall age of the water main that's in the ground throughout the village, as well as break history and the number of breaks. What this kind of shows us is if you look at, water mains between 40, 50, and 60 years old, that's where the lion's share of the breaks are. And fortunately, what also kind of surfaced was that a lot of them are in the same proximity, which is kind of the northwest corner of the village, the southeast corner of the village, and then along Coon Road. So, again, we have the different types material down on the bottom, cast iron, ductile, and then plastic pipe, and then the lineal footage, and then the breaks on each type. So the one thing that this really shows us is historically, and don't hold me to this, but, they say water main, anywhere from 80 to 100 years, depending upon soil conditions, quality of initial construction. There's so many different variables. But this kind of shows us that generally, we have a lot of water main that still is within its useful design life. So, again, we need to start planning for, addressing some of these hot spots, but then also, systematically replacing, because the last thing you want is, as this bubble moves and ages, you don't want to get caught where, most of your water main is 80 to 100 years old, and now we're having issues that we can't keep up with. So,
Looking at this, the northwest corner where that whole clump is up, is that the northwest corner you're talking about?
yes,
All those breaks are all like in one big cluster? That would be the newer sections of Carroll Stream, correct? The
Brad, he's looking at the next,
West.
he's looking
yeah,
at the
he's
next
looking at
slide.
this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's Spring Valley, Bighorn, the Pecourts, Georgetown, all those streets up there. So,
So how do you gave me a lifespan of what you think they should be, but yet I would suspect that this should be more in the Thunderbird area. In the old section, you should have a heck of a lot more breaks. When you see a line like that, I don't know where this is, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all straight in a line.
yeah,
So there must be something wrong with the way that that was put in. And
Yeah.
you would think after 2 or 3 breaks, instead of waiting until 8 or 10, we just replace that whole thing rather than keep going back. And we move down another 20 feet and redo it again. Is that what we're doing?
Sometimes guys are out there digging the location, and they can literally see the repair the sleeve that they repaired 3 months earlier.
And then they go back 6 months later and do it again, a little further down. You know you're gonna go back and do it again. I'll bet you if you waited another probably 6 months, you'll put 2 or 3 more red dots in them. It's like. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, that's a
I
possibility.
hope I'm wrong, but
Yeah, yeah. But, I mean, again, we never had this data before, and working with engineering, they put these graphics together, they put these heat maps together. It really gave us the opportunity to be able to plan and come up with areas that we can identify that we need to address. So, again, and you're right, you would think that these wouldn't be, but, there could be acidic soils up there that attack the ductile iron, the cast iron. You just don't know.
so we can't go on the age. It just
No,
may be the way
not
it was put
necessarily.
in
Yep,
originally.
right,
Okay,
right.
good.
Not strictly.
Well, I'm glad we're able to get this type of information.
So we've identified our hot pockets of where we've got, we know we have issues, and we've got some data that would tell us we're probably gonna have more water main breaks there. Why isn't this higher on the list than, say, water meters? Like, why are we waiting until FY '30? So, I mean, like, why aren't we taking, like, 2 of these pockets and saying, okay, if we're going out a couple times a year to repair a water main break out there, we're losing how much water for each water main break? So we're losing, I would think, more water for water main breaks in a concentrated area than we are from water meters, or am I wrong in that?
Hard to say. I'll take that, Brett. I mean, we can tag team it if you'd like. I don't want to saddle you with that because that wasn't solely in your lap. We made a decision to prioritize these three key things that I'll call them. And because of the age of the water meters, the fact that we've got such a huge number of water meters that are 30 and 35 years old, 20 to 35 years old, the fact that we expect water loss with those, we figured water meters rose to that number 2 spot. The other piece of it is, we've got a 3-year window of $10+ million that we know we have to spend at the plant because the plant is the top priority. And we didn't think we could dive into water mains right away. That was it.
On average, how much water do we lose during a water main break? And I know it varies based on
Yeah.
the,
That's hard to tell because, some of it's trickle, some of it's gush.
Flood.
Yeah, the geyser.
And by looking at the reports, you get them and you shut them back down within a few, 3, 4, 5 hours, it's done.
Yeah, the guys are very good. They get on them right away, at least isolate them right away,
right.
I like
to
the
minimize that water
question.
loss.
I like the question, what would the percentage go up? We're at 94.9, would it have been 95.9, 96.2? I don't know. That's a lot of water.
Are you talking about the bill rate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think John mentioned that earlier. If we could tighten things up, and I can't remember if you were referring to meters, but you kind of gauged a 96 to 97% bill rate, I thought you said earlier.
If we sold 17.5 million gallons more, which was related to the aging water meter
Yeah.
issue, we would add 1.6%, so we'd be billing about 96.5%, which would be the highest number that we've attained yet.
And of course, replacing water meters also then will increase billing, which will then
Correct.
refill the reserves where we can then pay for the water mains because we're using it from losing less water.
Correct.
The other thing to consider, I mean, this map seems like we have a lot going on. But relatively speaking, the number that we have annually is still, I don't want to jinx us, but relatively low. So that played a factor as well.
Do you ever do a comparison like ours against like Glendale Heights, Hanover Park, West Chicago? Is there, do you look, as the engineers and?
Yeah, I mean, you know, colleagues, we talk, we look, we ask. It's not really apples to apples because, you know, we have kind of a young system. And some of these other towns, you know, Glen Ellen, there's 100-year-old water main in the ground still. Yeah, I mean, I have a colleague that works in a town closer to the city, and last year they had over 360 breaks in a year.
Well, Glendale Heights incorporated the same year we did, 1959. Have you ever talked to do they have a public works guy? Okay, just asking.
Yeah, we can reach out to them for sure.
Do they have this kind of information?
I don't know that they have this type of information. I mean,
You're
I
being
mean, this
nice.
is,
So am I. I'm trying to be nice. So.
yeah.
I wish they did, because then you could really have apples to apples to compare. I
Yeah.
don't want to compare to West Chicago from 1869 or whatever it is. It's just
Right,
not,
right,
I
yeah.
get it,
Yeah.
you know.
But going older, I got a friend who works at Public Works in St. Charles. I think in January, they had 20 breaks. So they had almost our year's worth of breaks in a month, but their system is 100 years old.
Right.
It's parts of it.
That's the scary part. Okay, thank you.
Just to tag on to Mary's previous comment in terms of scheduling and whatnot, I mentioned a lot of indigestion in terms of putting this plan together, and certainly staff has done a lot more research in the last year, and engineering's been invaluable in a lot of the data points that they've gathered. But in charting all of this stuff out in terms of phasing, I don't know, maybe I'm frantic in normal life, but I'm running up to Bill's office. Bill, we're broke in 3 years. I mean, we're facing insolvency, doing everything at once. Because originally, the first time a lot of these proposed main projects even made it into the proposed budget was this initial year, and it was in the confines of this three-year budget. Just out of necessity, doing all of that level of work at once is just not financially feasible. Brad's also got newer staff. It's a younger department now, so they're busy training up as well. So it was a tough choice, but I think the main stuff just made it into the plan, and we will need to wait probably. I think design starts in year 5 or 6.
Can I make a suggestion?
Surely.
So residents may not, and the general public may not recognize a water main break as being a water main break and may not report it. So a couple months ago, 3 months ago, I'm driving down Coon, it's 5 o'clock, and right at Munson and Coon, the water is pouring into the street, and the first words out of my mouth is, oh, we've got a water main break, and I'm on the phone with 911 trying to explain to them, there's water pouring into the street, it's a water main break, you need to notify the police department, we need to shut, because Coon Road was flooding. And it was a water main break, but like, people are driving through the water and not even like giving it a second thought. So can we maybe start looking at like public education program, like putting out, what are the signs of a water main break? We might have, like you said, like a trickle, but like if I'm walking around my backyard and all of a sudden my foot like sinks down into the ground and there's a ton of water there that shouldn't be there, it's a reason to call Public Works to at least investigate it. So this might help us a little bit, maybe find water main breaks faster, less water loss, if we can just maybe start educating people on what, if they see it, what to do.
Sure, we can do kind of a public information piece on social media and the website about what's a water main break.
You know,
Sure.
twice a year or whatever, just so that people know, if you see water flooding the street, call 911, that's not normal.
We get calls on the building line regularly. I have no water. It's not shut off day, it's not shut off week. I have no water, and we immediately dispatch Public Works to check it out. Because if somebody's often it's somebody who doesn't have service in their home, it's because there's a break. So,
Sure.
doesn't cost us anything to do that, other than staff time to put something together, so just a suggestion.
Okay, the last project is sanitary sewer lining program. This is basically taking a look at the condition of our current sanitary sewer. I know a few years back, Red Zone did a full assessment of the sewer. So that would be looking at long-term lining. Lining does give a structural component to the sewer. So again, this is just a rehabilitation technique to prolong the life of the sanitary sewer. So we're looking at starting up a program in 31. So that concludes the slides. Any questions? Yes.
So I got a question. So it seems like water is kind of like the biggest potentially revenue generator for the village, which has a, I'll use my economic degree, inelastic demand, meaning that you can, if you increase taxes in food and beverage or even in restaurants, someone can say, hey, I don't want to go to Carroll Stream anymore. I could go to the other place where they don't increase the taxes on the food and the beverage. But if we have 11,000 homes residents where we do increase the water percentage, 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%, it's an inelastic demand, meaning that they could get frustrated, the residents could get frustrated, but they're still going to pay it. Is that something that we can consider where we recognize that we do have flexibility, or that's something that we should focus on as kind of like a revenue generator, not in the short term, but also thinking like 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say, okay, 2025, we did this, and now we have the money 10 years later to pay for it.
I think what would have really been important, especially with the newer members on the board, is to show them what we all pay for the water versus what our around
Neighboring.
neighboring
absolutely.
towns charge for the water is absolutely amazing what they get for the water. So I mean, if somebody would move because we'd raised the price 8 or 10%, that would still be 15 or 20% maybe lower than some of our neighbors are. I mean, so, no, and it isn't a major source, because if you look, we have to pay for the water, so we collect the money. Yeah, we do make some money on it, but that's to keep everything running. We have major sources, there's other major sources. I mean, we have a lot of sources, but that isn't, I wouldn't consider that to be it's a good source, but not a major source.
Right.
Because we pay so much for water, and we charge that and bill them right back. We've been very competitive on water. We're usually out of.
We're among the lowest of all water commission communities.
Second lowest, I believe, in all of them.
But
We're the second lowest cost,
Out of how many towns? 30? what?
32,
That
3?
tells you if anybody had moved, they wouldn't move, they would maybe move here, because if they want to live where the water's cheap, this is the place to be.
It's on our
wanna-
website. We could,
Sure.
if you want to, after the presentation, we can jump to the website and put it up.
I want to speak to Trustee Guthrie's comment. So it's an enterprise fund, right? It's paid for by user fees and the water rates. I think we historically have always tried to balance what's the money, what is the amount of money that we need to maintain the system and cover the cost of our projects without overcharging residents. And I think that that's the right outlook, and I think what we're telling you today is we're arriving at that impasse of we haven't been charging enough, and if we continue charging what we charge today, we're not going to be able to afford to pay for those projects. So I understand the way you're looking at it. We're not looking at it, staff's not coming at it from the perspective of, hey, let's build this large bank account so we can let it sit there in the end. We're looking at it as how do we fund the projects that we need to fund to keep the system viable for the residents to use. So I think for me, and I think the board, this is the board's message generally, is striking the right balance of fund the projects that we need to fund as a community, but let's not overcharge if we don't need to overcharge. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I remember when we did the property tax, and people said right away that this is gonna be a money grab for us, and that every year it's gonna go up, and it has not. But you go too far, and people are gonna be
Right.
up in arms.
Right.
Well, Trustee Zalick, being you brought that up, we actually dropped $700,000 in vehicle stickers when we put the $3.8
Right.
million property tax on, so it
But
actually,
if some people think that we're just getting money and
Yeah.
then they're really gonna be on
Right, yeah,
Facebook.
going for a big bite.
Right, that's, yeah,
Again,
a
we're,
fine line that,
this is about funding major infrastructure projects. We are still, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, even if we increase by what we're talking about, we're not going to all of a sudden be the most expensive water
We might move up a spot.
among DuPage Water Commission customers. We are still not in the same position as some of our neighboring communities with their rates in the last couple of years. We had a DuPage community at a 28% increase. We had a neighboring community at a 15 and a 10% increase. So we are trying to be fiscally responsible with what we do, and at the same time manage the projects that we have.
I think a lot of the towns are going through what we're going through right now. They went through them because they're 30 or 40 or 50 years older than us, and they figured it out. They just couldn't pass on a little bit more than what they got, and if they continued to do that, the infrastructure just kept deteriorating. So you want to let it keep deteriorating, kick the can down the road, and it costs billions to catch back up again. I mean, and the damage that it could create, the downtime it creates, I mean, so what we're doing right now, we're probably at the right time and the right place to do what we're doing when you look at the age of our town versus the towns around us. That's why I asked about Glendale Heights. That's rare to have two towns side by side that incorporated exactly at the same time, the same year, 59. So I mean, I think they may have went through this 30 or 40 years ago because that's what they were going through at that 50-year mark or whatever it might be, so. But I don't think anybody's gonna move out of town based on what I would.
It's going up $3.50.
They would get upset if they're turning their water on and it didn't work, or flush their toilet and it wasn't going anywhere, then they'd be complaining. In the meantime, our infrastructure has been, we've spent what we needed to spend and do what we needed to do. I mean, and we're just gonna continue to do that as a service company. That's what we're gonna continue to do. Sorry, go ahead.
Next two slides are the detailed 10-year plan that you've had a chance to review. I didn't have any specific comments on this other than the shaded items are part of those new initiatives that we're bringing to you now, saying we need to actively look at a meter replacement program. We need to start funding regular water main replacements. And those represent about a 50% increase over the previous plan because these are things that haven't been baked into the cake up until this point. So we need to reflect the actual cost of caring for the system and make sure we're on a sound funding plan so that we can get there a little bit at a time. That's kind of always been our objective, to avoid the 28% off the bat. I mean, you want the phones to start ringing past a 28% rate increase. So we're trying to keep it gradual and in bite-sized pieces.
And the nice thing is, doing what you've been doing and jumping ahead, when you look at the projections of revenue and fund balance, it's balanced in a way that we don't run it dry.
Right.
But then we get to the point that we can relatively quickly move on to the other projects once these are done. So, I mean, it's a well-done budget.
Can I ask a question? I guess I've never even thought about this. Fire hydrant replacement. Believe me, my dad was a fireman, I understand why fire hydrants are critically important that they're maintained. But why does the fire district not have skin in this game? Why are they not contributing towards fire hydrant maintenance, replacement? Because really, I mean, it's the tool that we provide to them. Yes, I mean, we provide the water to it. We flush them and make sure that they're working properly, but when we have to replace them, why is this not an intergovernmental shared expense? I don't legitimately
Fair
know
question.
the answer to this.
Yeah,
Wouldn't even try to answer that.
I'll let Brad chime in. The only thing I'll say about it is, you know, it's part of the main water infrastructure of the village. So that's why I think it falls more in our lap I think it's a fair question, and we're a little bit different than some communities where you have a fire department that is part of the village or city community. That is not the case where we are. Obviously, we've got a district. So it's an interesting question, but I think it lies in the fact that it's part of the water infrastructure that we own.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate. We've got towns that have unincorporated pockets. Like Bloomingdale has, like, I know one neighborhood in particular, they don't have fire hydrants there, but Bloomingdale is still required, or is it the county that takes care of the rest of the water infrastructure in that particular neighborhood? So if they wanted fire hydrants, then the residents would have to contribute towards paying into a fire district to get hydrants in their neighborhood. So I guess I don't understand why
So
we can't go
I think the unincorporated areas do pay into the fire district, don't they?
I believe they do.
I believe they do. I mean, I believe that, like Timber Lane, I'm right on the cusp of the end of the Carroll Stream.
Yeah.
And I know our fire department at one time went in and actually mapped everything where the fire hydrants would go if they ever had to put them in. They knew right where they wanted them strategically to put in, if we ever ran water in there. But those people didn't want it. But I think they pay for some of the services anyway. I think that they're in there. Like where Joe Bird lives on Fair Oaks, he's actually in the fire district for West Chicago and not in Carroll Stream. So, but I would think that the houses west of Fair Oaks Road, on this side of the creek, if there's a fire, our fire department's gonna go there and do that. So they have to pay. Somebody's got.
They don't have fire hydrants, sir.
No, they're going with tankers.
Right.
That's the problem.
It's like most
That's-
unincorporated, they don't have.
We spent all that money to run the water to the school, Benjamin. That's unincorporated. But we did that knowing that there has been school fires that have been horrible. And we took our money and put it in the unincorporated area, and I think that we all know that was the right thing to do. So. Put that down, Mary Frusaloni wants to know.
I got that.
I like that they would pay for it, but I don't think that'll happen, so.
Brad, did you have anything else to add that you wanted to
I
add
was
to that?
gonna just say it was ownership.
Yeah.
We hit them
Check,
for,
will you check on that?
we hit them
Make
for a
sure
usage
they're-
fee every time they open up a fire hydrant.
Tax them.
Ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
You're starting a firestorm here.
All right.
Gonna get a fire hydrant.
Back into more of the boring accounting stuff. So just again, with our continued eye on funding the long-term plan, we want to make sure that we're able to meet the needs of the fund both operationally and capital together over the long term. So we have developed, as we have in the past, a 10-year future cost model. This slide deals with operations, and I've listed various percentages, assumed percentages on an annual basis, and they weight out at about 3.7% per year. I'd call that kind of a minimum number in terms of just the general progression of operating costs. And again, if we're not selling any more water, every year it's 3.7 just to keep pace based on kind of history. So the 10-year plan, as we're showing on these next slides, reflects a 5% increase this May 1 and 4% for every year thereafter. And the results are in this chart here. So on the left-hand column shows in every particular year the fund gain or loss. And here in 27 and 28, you can really see the impact of that $14.5 million capital investment, where fund reserves drain very rapidly. Again, 32-year-old headworks, issues with screw pumps, we have to get in there, we have to design this project, and we need to get in and build a 2-year lead time of construction. I think B&W said it would take just for construction. So that depletes our reserves already by close to $10 million over that 3-year period. And I'd remark, we have about $18.6 million in the fund as of projected 4/30/25. We had $4.2 million from the general fund reserves. It gets us to this 23.7 roughly, because I think there's also performance for fiscal '26 in that number. So that number declines over this 10-year period. The projected reserve balances, so really, we're at about 18 million roughly at the end of this year without all of the extraneous surplus money. So we're draining it to about $8 million, so it's less than cut in half, even though going from 24, I realize going from 24 to 8 million is like a 2/3 reduction. But again, our hope is to avoid having to surplus tax dollars in the general fund. But certainly, with the pressure we're on many fronts, we need to make sure that we're capital heavy in the early years. So on the we also require, at least for funding, a 25% of operating expenses per year. So that's just kind of a marker that gradually increases as the budget increases each year. So again, all that assumes is a 4% annual rate adjustment, and it includes everything that's listed in the capital improvement program as of today. This is just an illustrative side. We're not proposing borrowing. And even in our casual discussions with Baxter and Woodman, the more attractive rates, I think the EPA rate is 1.87%. They were like, good luck. You're not gonna qualify for it. So they have a very rigorous qualification schedule. I don't know the details. I'm sure there are many people in this room that know more than me, but this would reflect the cost of traditional borrowing for a AA rated community on a general obligation bond. So you not only have to pay the $10 million back, you're paying $4.5 million in interest over a 20-year loan. So we want to keep costs as low as we can and not pay $4.5 million in interest. We'd rather build projects with that money. So the recommended increase for May 1st, 2025 is 5%. On both water and sewer rates, so 70 cents overall. Just for a reference point, the 22 cents of the DuPage Water Commission is just under a third of that total cost, so the remaining 2/3 of the increase goes right into saving for capital projects. And another reference point, the City of Chicago CPI rate as of December 2024 was 4%, so it is 1 percentage point above CPI. So I think reasonably defensible. I think people do understand that costs go up, but this is the residents' drinking water system, and it needs to be cared for. We all pay into it. The average impact then to a customer, average consumption on a residential basis is about 4,800 gallons. Keep the math simple. I rounded up to 5,000 gallons, and that's $3.50 per month for the first year.
Well done.
We have a couple more slides, but it's
I mean of the water.
It's the board's option. If you'd like to hear more about some of the special funds, let's finish it.
Absolutely.
Okay. The police pension fund, for those that are newer to this, there are, some are very familiar with it. Others are a little bit newer to it. The village and some 600 other villages throughout Illinois have separate police pension boards that invest money. Well, they don't invest money anymore. The state has taken that over. But they hold all the assets for their retired police officers. So as of our last audit, so the pension board is a statutorily appointed board. The mayor appoints 2 members, and the officers appoint 3 members. 2 active and 1 retired beneficiary sit on the pension board. They make all the decisions in terms of the pension or board membership. So just a snapshot of our last audit, the fund earned more than 9.25% on their assets. The assumed rate of return is 6.5% for the fund. So they did quite well, but this also follows 2 very poor investment years. The funded position of the fund in terms of having all of the necessary assets on hand to pay 100% of pension liabilities that's computed by an actuary is it went from just under 67% to about 69%. So we gained a little bit of ground over the last year, which is fantastic news. We are typically better funded than most police pension systems in the state, whereas we're in the upper 60s. I would guess, based on my discussions with the actuary, most funds are probably in the 50s to 60s somewhere, low 60s. And we had net assets in that fund of $74.3 million at April 30th. So fast forward, we've done 9 months in the current year. Those net assets have already grown to $79.4 million. We've actually breached the $80 million mark, which is phenomenal. It's really, I mean, when I started here in '97, we might have had 4 retirees, and I can't even imagine what the assets were at that point. Maybe $1 million. So we're managing $80 million, 58 beneficiaries currently being paid monthly pension retirement benefits, totaling $5.1 million per year. So it's a pretty amazing.
Spread out over the 58, not just to one person.
Correct. Well, correct.
So that, the funded position, that's if every single police officer we had in here retired today and started collecting.
It's a percentage of the assets on hand.
Right.
It gets complicated. If you looked at the actuarial value of the assets, the actuary basically smooths returns over a 5-year period.
Right.
They do that because if the fund has a negative 20% return year, the village contribution goes up 20%.
Right.
So they smooth the value of the assets, and we have deferred losses from those 2 really bad years 2 years ago on top of a 9.25% return, so that it all comes out in the wash. So what were we getting at? I'm sorry, it's getting late.
No, I was just saying that the funded position, that 60, just under 69%.
Thank you for.
Basically covers if the whole police department was eligible to retire, we could pay basically 69% of it if they all retired today.
As of the measurement date on April 30th, the actuary basically calculates the full liability of all members.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
And
what I said.
and they take the actuarial value of assets combined to the liability. The difference is called the unfunded liability. And that's what you amortize through 2040. And the state is contemplating kicking that can. They usually do once you're amortizing this liability over a shorter period of time, your contributions go up,
And the state figures out that they can't pay
And everybody
their side?
from the cities start to scream uncle because they can't afford those payments, and then they kick it out another 10 years. So it's basically a moving target.
Right.
So it's a very interesting financial entity, the whole pension stuff, but they're doing quite well there. The contribution from the village in our general fund will increase 7.5% for this coming year. So it's about $250,000. The remaining, this is the last slide, second to last slide. We have a TIF district in town, as you all know, most of you know. We are in year 11 of 13 for a redevelopment agreement that was between the village and the owner of the Caputo's development when it was first constructed. The village contributes half of the sales tax that Caputo's generates and puts it into the TIF, and is part of the incentive for the development of what was in 2011, Don, 2012, a vacant warehouse that had sat for years and years and years as our eastern gateway into the community. So the developer came in, made that their flagship store, was just there today buying coffee. And that is part of the incentive that they get. They also get what's called property tax increment. When it's first developed, but pre-development, the assessed value is frozen, and everything that goes above that in terms of the assessed, it goes into the TIF and it goes to the developer. So we are coming to nearing the end, at least, of this first redevelopment agreement. In the next 2 years, even in our 3-year plan, those sales tax payments will sunset, and we will then enjoy 100% of all of the revenues from the Caputo's grocery store. There's an additional 2 years of property tax increment built into that agreement, and then the village's obligation to the developer is completed at that point. So newer this year, and probably for the first time since the original construction of the improvements there, the store and the warehouse, is the Schmale Road Water Main Extension project, which will be paid from TIF funds, most of it. I think there's a very small piece that's going to be in our capital projects fund discussion 2 weeks from now. So that's about a $600,000 investment to help facilitate the developer to bring new tenants into the center there. So it's exciting. I believe we have leases signed for the Chipotle's underway.
The site just got fenced over the weekend.
Okay, fantastic. So things are finally starting to happen there. So the TIF is actually fairly mature at this point. Its statutory life is 23 years, but the redevelopment agreement only covered it for 15. So that was what was originally constructed and agreed to between the developer and the village at that point. So that thing is doing what it was intended to do. Two other equipment replacement fund's not small, but I just put a statement in here. Basically what it does is we save for vehicles as they age. So if a police car costs $80,000 and has a 4-year life, we're putting $20,000 away each year into this fund so that we make sure we can buy all the police cars that are needed at the time that they're needed. Because there was, believe it or not, a time where we were driving around in 8-year-old, 9-year-old police cars. And we found that they don't hold up that long because they're running all the time and sometimes they're run fairly hard. So, and take our Vector machine, that's what is $360,000 piece of equipment with maybe a 15-year life. Try coming up with the funding out of pocket in the water fund for that. So this is a mechanism where we put a little bit of money or a fair amount of money away each year so that it's on hand and it doesn't become part of like the budget cuts where it kind of isolates them. So it's worked out pretty well. We've been doing that for probably 6 or 7 years now. The last bullet point, just in terms of full disclosure, in terms of all the funds within the village's budget, our state and federal asset seizure fund. One example in this last year is the police drone program has been funded out of one of these asset seizure funds. So they're very regulated by the Department of Justice in terms of what they can be done. So we rely on the police department to find qualified projects for things that otherwise wouldn't be in the general fund budget. So the drone program would be one example of that. This is the last slide, so.
Any questions, anybody? Jimmy?
No, I'm good.
One more budget meeting in the schedule for March 17th, where it'll be very engineering facing in terms of the capital improvement program now for the rest of the village. We talked a lot about the water and sewer fund tonight because it pays its own capital, but this is the road program, storm sewers, and other public infrastructure. So that's also a big one. So stay tuned for that. We'll get more information out on that.
Thank you. I think you've done an excellent job, as usual. You and the staff put this together. Thank you, Bill. I know there's a lot of effort that goes into this. I'm really concerned about the water, only because of we buy it from Chicago, and they're so, it's just a total, I almost said a bad word, show.
Cluster.
It's a cluster, yes. It is bad. The ultimatum is March 31st to let us know if we're going to save that money. That would make a big difference in what we're doing here, would make us a lot more money to be able to fix a lot more things if that was to happen. I don't think it'll happen, but you never know. I've seen stranger things happen. I don't think they realize that we spend right now, DuPage County, over $120 million with them every year and never late with a payment. We do a lot of the infrastructure work that they should be doing because they don't have the money to do it. Where we replace things, they put Band-Aids on them. I mean, what we've seen at Jardine and what we've seen at Lexington and Laramie, the second pump station coming out of the lake, is a disaster waiting to happen. So, I mean, they have treated us bad. They won't even consider talking. They meet and then go away and then nothing happens. The ultimatum is the 31st of March, and now we'll get to see the end of this month what happens. It could go bad, and it could go real good, so we don't know. It's right now.
In Chicago, it'll go bad.
Well, with Chicago, they'll probably think March 31st is like 2075 or something. But to build the water program that we're talking about is a 17-year project. This isn't going to happen overnight. So, I mean, we have to look at this. This is a long-range project to run water 200 feet deep out of Lake Michigan. I mean, it's a major, that's why I brought the staff with me, and I never heard of boring under 200 feet underneath. I mean, they'll be underneath people's homes, they won't even know. We'll be down so deep, and you don't know what you're gonna bore into when you get there. I mean, so this is a very complicated time for what we do with water, so.
Sure has. It has, the general fund was kind of a walk in the park compared, but that's what we get. It's challenging, but we try and figure out the best way forward.
Thank you, and thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by trustee McCarthy, second by trustee Frizzaloni. Clerk call the roll.
Trustee Guthrie.
Aye.
Trustee Anselmo.
Aye.
Trustee Berger.
Aye.
Trustee Zalek.
Aye.
Trustee Frizzaloni.
Aye.
Trustee McCarthy.
Aye.
Hey, Julia?
McCarthy and then Frizzaloni was second.